Hello, everyone. My name is Mallory Johnson, and for this project, I was assigned yes/no questions. And the reason I chose this was um, because I thought it would be really interesting to dive into because it is a topic where um, naturally, I guess personally, in my own mind, I was thinking um, it would be an easier topic for English students to learn. Um, but after diving in and after reading chapter 11 about yes no questions, um, it comes off as very confusing and a little difficult for um, foreign students who maybe don't understand um, our gestures or don't understand maybe our culture or things we might ask because of the differences in ways you can answer these types of questions. And so um, the article that I actually found a different article than one of the ones that was in the book. Um, but I found one that was called Yes No Questions That Convey a Critical Stance in the Language Classroom. Um, and it was basically a survey. And before we dive into that part, I kind of want to look at a couple of things that the book says about yes no questions. The book kind of defines yes no questions as questions that are neutral in nature, but are asking for confirmation or denial of a proposition. So basically, are you going to the mall? Yes or no. It's the speaker is wanting to know. Um, and so it also says that these questions can also be called open-ended questions, where the speaker has an open mind about what the answer might be. So it's not necessarily targeted towards a certain answer or asked in a way where they are expecting a yes or a no, which is one thing that they do talk about. Also, a couple of important things that I found in the chapter were negative yes and no questions, which are not necessarily open minded in their nature. And an example of this that I came up with was the question, "Isn't Anna coming over for dinner tonight?" So when a speaker asks this question, normally an English speaker will realize and understand that the speaker asking the question is thought that Anna was coming to the dinner and had an understanding that that was the situation, that she was coming, and not necessarily either way. So that's just an example of that, um, how there can be a presumption of a yes or a no. I also, after looking at a lot of the different concepts, thinks that this is probably one of the hardest. At least just getting a look at all of the other ones. That this is kind of one of the hard things to grasp, because a lot of the students might not necessarily understand our culture, understand maybe sarcasm, understand situational type um, things where they may be talking to someone and someone says, "Isn't Anna coming over?" or something, and they don't understand that they were expecting Anna to come over, and so it might be difficult and a little intimidating sometimes to come up with an answer to those questions, because we kind of make it sound like we're asking something that we're not really asking. So just reflecting over the whole chapter and looking at it as a whole, I think that is actually probably one of the hardest things, at least coming from a second language point of view, learner point of view, with learning Spanish. Sometimes when I was in Spain, people would ask me questions, and I wouldn't necessarily, I would understand maybe the situation or the vocabulary, but I wouldn't necessarily know how to answer because I didn't know, who I was talking to or what they were like. So, I just thought that might be one of the hardest things, and so I kind of talked about that in my paper, about those negative yes and no questions that might be a little tricky. The book also talks about that, and it says in the book that negative yes and no questions create semantic problems for many ESL and EFL learners, and that's very understandable. And so they give an example, um, and the example sentence is, "Don't you have bananas?" And it could be responded with, "Yes, we have no bananas," or "No, we have bananas." So it's correct to use yes and no, but when in the yes sentence it means no, and in the no sentence it means yes. So that might be a little bit difficult for the students to understand, just because it's all switched around. So that has the ability to get a little complicated, but the book also gives some ways you can help teach that. Okay, and so in the article, which was a 28-hour observation of an adult ESL classroom, and it's recorded. It was recorded to describe a particular type of yes and no questions used by teachers in environments where some sort of evaluation is relevant. And the purpose may vary in that. So in his article, the author kind of focuses on questions that prefer a yes or prefer a no. Kind of like what we were talking about in the beginning. So, for example, the question, can you walk? Normally, it prefers one thing or another. Normally, we would ask, can you walk, and not have a certain answer in mind, yes or no, because it's very common that yes, people can walk, but that question would be very situational, so it would probably have a preferred answer in the purpose for that question. And also another one would be a question like nothing special, which the preferred answer for that would be no. And you're asking a question expecting a certain answer. And so these types of questions can be built to prefer either one, a yes or a no, depending on the speaker. Also, another important thing from the article that I took is they discussed yes-no interrogatives. And in American English, it talked about how they can be used to perform a range of social actions such as information, confirmation, request. So basically kind of the same thinking, where you're simply just asking a question just to confirm some kind of information. So not necessarily preferring a yes or a no, but just basically just simply asking a question, which is one of the easier things to do once the grammar is achieved, and things like that. So an example of that would be like, are you going to the movies? Not necessarily preferring a yes or a no. There could be intentions behind it, if the speaker is wanting you to come to the movies, there could be a yes that they prefer, but the question is just simply asking, are you going to the movies? It doesn't prefer a certain answer, yes or no. But when you put the word aren't that's when it changes. Aren't you going to the movies? That's when it is set up as a negative yes or no question, meaning that the speaker is was expecting you to go to the movies. So maybe previously you already told them you were going to the movies, and the speaker is asking you, aren't you going to the movies, expecting you to say yes, because he thought that you had agreed to it. So those are just a couple of things that important things that I really took away from the article, especially, and also in the book. They talked a lot about those things, and the negative yes and no questions, and the interrogatives were really stood out to me. And so thinking about those certain things in my future classroom, I really just wanted to kind of simplify it because it seems so complicated, and like there are so many options with how you can answer these yes-no questions, and how people can ask them. It's pretty intimidating to try and come up with those questions. So the book gave some suggested activities. One in particular I thought would be really, really good for students to get them open, and to make it a little bit more fun and interactive, is to play the game 20 Questions. And that's always a fun game to play anyways. And possibly giving the students questions they can use, example questions, so that they're not pulling things from scratch, but so that they have, things to pull from, and resources and things like that. But having them play that game with other students would give them the opportunity to answer yes and no questions, and also possibly ask yes and no questions. Like if you're thinking of a bird, the asker would say, okay, is it an animal? And the person would, have to respond yes or no. And obviously those questions aren't necessarily negative yes or no questions or anything like that complicated. They're just simple questions. So it would kind of get them thinking in that way. And I really, really liked the idea of including that kind of activity in their learning, and making it interactive, and as well as helpful in hearing how questions might sound and how you might answer questions. I think that would be really, really beneficial for the students. And so that's what I took away from this chapter. I really enjoyed looking at these questions because there's a lot more to them than I realized, and there's a lot more involved, I think, than I thought there was going to be involved in especially asking yes/no questions, and also answering, understanding, being culturally aware of questions that might be appropriate or not appropriate to ask, and also just understanding the question and realizing that yes or no may be in the question, but it might not necessarily require a yes or a no. So I thought it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a little something too.